The story of the Great Library of Alexandria does not begin with a building, nor with a collection of scrolls. It begins, as so many epic tales do, with a dream. It was the dream of a young man who... The air on the coast of Egypt is warm, thick with the scent of the salt sea and the rich, dark earth of the Nile Delta. A strip of land lies pressed between the vast, shimmering expanse of the Mediterranean and the tranquil, reed-lined shores of Lake Moeotis. It is here that Alexander, the young Macedonian king, stood, the sea breeze tugging at his cloak. He was only 25 years old, yet he had led his armies from the green hills of his homeland to the heart of the Persian Empire, and now to the ancient, mysterious land of Egypt. He saw more than just a strategic location for a new port, a place where ships from Greece, from Italy, from the Levant, could easily trade with the boundless wealth of Egypt. He saw a canvas. His tutor, the great philosopher Aristotle, had instilled in him a profound respect for knowledge, for culture, for the power of ideas. Alexander envisioned a city that would be not just a conduit for goods, but a crucible for civilization itself. A place where the intellect of Greece would meet the ancient wisdom of Egypt, where merchants and mercenaries would walk the same streets as poets and philosophers. His vision was one of magnificent scale. He paced out the city's future boundaries himself, mapping wide avenues that would intersect at right angles, a grid of perfect order imposed upon the wild shore. He imagined a great causeway, the Heptastadion, stretching nearly a mile long to connect the mainland to the island of Pharos, creating two magnificent deep-water harbors. He dreamed of towering lighthouses, gleaming marble temples, bustling agoras, and verdant public gardens. He called this city Alexandria. It was a declaration, an act of supreme confidence. It was to be the capital of his new world, a beacon of Hellenistic culture shining out across the sea. He saw it not as a conqueror's fortress, but as a global metropolis, a place where all peoples could gather, not just to trade silks and spices, but to exchange thoughts, to argue, to learn, and to create. The air itself, he dreamed, would hum with intellectual energy. This Alexandria would be a testament not only to his power, but to the enduring power of the human mind. He would not live to see this grandest part of his vision realized. But in founding the city, he had tilled the soil and planted the seed of what was to become the greatest repository of knowledge the ancient world had ever known. The dream had been dreamed, and now it waited for another to bring it to life. Ptolemy, the first Soter, and the birth of the library. Alexander's vision for his city was potent, but his time on earth was fleeting. His sudden death from fever in the opulent heart of Babylon sent shockwaves across the vast, newly forged empire. The world he had conquered, held together by the sheer force of his will and charisma, immediately began to fracture. His powerful generals, the Diadochi, men who had marched together as brothers in arms from Macedon to India, now turned on one another in a desperate and bloody scramble for the spoils of a god. The wars of the successors began, tearing the empire apart into warring kingdoms. Amidst this whirlwind of chaos and ambition, one of the most astute and calculating of Alexander's companions. A seasoned general named Ptolemy, son of Lagus, skillfully outmaneuvered his rivals to secure the richest prize of all, the ancient, sun-drenched land of Egypt. Ptolemy was a different man from the meteoric Alexander, where Alexander was a whirlwind of divine aspiration and restless energy. Ptolemy was patient, pragmatic, and possessed of a deep, unshakable cunning. He was older, a veteran who had seen the cost of reckless ambition. He understood that a dynasty was not forged in a single blaze of glory, but built slowly, brick by brick, with careful planning and foresight. His first and most brilliant move was not purely military, but an act of supreme political theater. He hijacked Alexander's funeral cortege as it made its way back to Macedonia and diverted it to Egypt. By possessing the body of the deified king, he possessed a symbol of legitimacy that no other general could claim. He laid Alexander to rest in a magnificent tomb in the heart of his new capital, forever linking his rule to the memory of the great conqueror. To rule Egypt with its millennia of history and its proud ancient traditions, Ptolemy knew he needed more than just a Macedonian army and a famous tomb. He needed to establish a new kind of legitimacy that would endure for generations. He declared himself pharaoh, adopting the customs of the land to appease the powerful Egyptian priesthood. But he knew that to the wider Hellenistic world, the world of his rivals, he needed a different, more potent symbol of power. He needed to make Alexandria not just the new capital of Egypt, but the undisputed center of Greek civilization, a city that would outshine even the fading glory of Athens in its intellectual splendor. Walking the nascent avenues of his city, the dust of construction still hanging in the air, Ptolemy, Soter, the savior, contemplated his legacy. He remembered the teachings of Aristotle that had so captivated the young Alexander. He understood that true power resided not just in armies and treasuries, but in the control of knowledge and narrative. The idea began to form, not as a poetic dream of universal brotherhood, but as a calculated act of cultural supremacy. If Alexandria could become the home of all the world's stories, all its philosophies, all its scientific discoveries, then all the world's cleverest men would have to come to Alexandria. They would lend their genius and their prestige to his new dynasty. His ambition was encouraged and given concrete shape by a new arrival in the city, an exiled Athenian statesman and scholar of immense renown named Demetrius of Phaleron. Demetrius, a student from Aristotle's own school, the Lyceum, had once governed Athens. He was a man of immense learning and political experience, a living embodiment of the intellectual traditions Ptolemy sought to co-opt. In the quiet of the new palace, Demetrius spoke to the king, not of armies, but of books. He described the great philosophical schools of Athens, where collections of texts were central to learning. But he proposed something far grander, an institution on a scale the world had never seen. He suggested that Ptolemy should not merely build a school, but a sanctuary for the muses themselves, a Musaeum. This institution would be given a royal mandate to actively seek out and collect a copy of every single scroll in the world, from the epic poems of Homer to the mathematical treatises of the Babylonians. In this proposal, Ptolemy saw the perfect instrument of his ambition. It was a project of breathtaking audacity, a form of intellectual conquest. To possess the world's knowledge would be to possess the world's mind. The library would be a magnet, drawing the greatest scholars, poets, and scientists to his shore. Their presence would bring prestige to his fledgling dynasty, and their work would bring innovations in science, engineering, and medicine that would strengthen his kingdom for centuries to come. With a royal decree, backed by the immense wealth of the Egyptian state, Ptolemy I, Soter, set the great project in motion. The hunt for the world's wisdom had officially begun. Building the Musaeum in the most opulent district of Alexandria, the royal quarter known as the Bruchion, a sprawling city within city of palaces, temples, and private harbors. A plot of land was consecrated for the great project. This was not to be a mere building tucked away in a corner, but a sacred precinct, a sprawling campus designed to be the intellectual heart of the world. The royal architects, funded by an effectively limitless treasury, drew up plans that blended the elegant, rational principles of Hellenistic design with the monumental grandeur of Egyptian traditions. The result was a sanctuary dedicated not to a single god, but to all 9 muses, the goddesses of the arts and sciences. It was to be called the Musaeum, the House of the Muses. The construction was an immense undertaking, drawing upon the wealth of a kingdom. Great ships arrived from the quarries of Greece, their holds heavy with brilliant white marble that would gleam under the African sun. Limestone was floated down the Nile from Tura, and massive blocks of red granite were brought from as far south as Aswan. From the mountains of Lebanon came fragrant cedar wood destined to become the cabinets and shelves that would protect the precious scrolls from the ravages of time and insects. Slowly, the magnificent complex took shape. Visitors would approach not a single building, but a network of structures connected by long, graceful colonnades. These covered walkways, or peripatoi, were a deliberate homage to the school of Aristotle in Athens, where the philosopher was known to walk while teaching his students. To stroll here was to experience a rhythmic procession of light and shadow. The brilliant glare of the sun filtered into a cool, contemplative space. The walkways enclosed a series of immense, tranquil courtyards, each a world unto itself. Here, landscape artists created meticulously planned gardens that were both beautiful and scientific. They were living libraries of botany, filled with rare and exotic plants gathered from the farthest reaches of the empire, from the frankincense trees of Arabia to the lotuses of India. Each specimen carefully labeled for study. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and damp earth, and the only sounds were the gentle rustle of palm fronds and the constant, soothing murmur of water from ornate fountains, their basins carved in the shape of mythological creatures. The Musaeum was a nexus of interconnected facilities, each designed for a specific intellectual purpose. There were lecture halls with tiered seating for formal instruction and smaller seminar rooms for close debate. There were quiet, solitary studies where a scholar could work in absolute peace, and anatomical theaters where, in a revolutionary and controversial break with tradition, Physicians like Eratosthenes could perform human dissections, mapping the mysteries of the body. Rising above the rooftops was an astronomical observatory, a tower whose bronze instruments saw miliary spheres and astrolabes gleamed under the stars, allowing scholars to map the heavens with unprecedented accuracy. At its heart was the great hall itself, the bibliothek, which housed the main collection. It was a vast, high-ceilinged chamber designed to inspire awe. The walls were lined, floor to ceiling, with thousands of niches, like a honeycomb, each waiting to be filled with the wisdom of the world. In the center of the hall stood statues of the muses and great thinkers of the past, looking down upon the scholars as silent patrons. Another crucial part of the complex was the Secession, a grand communal dining hall. Scholars who were invited to the Musaeum were not just given lodging and a generous stipend. They were required to take their meals together. This was a deliberate design choice to foster a constant, informal cross-pollination of ideas, ensuring that the geometer would argue with the poet, the historian would question the physician, and the philosopher would debate them all. The institution was a paradise for the mind, a perfectly calibrated engine for thought. The scholars invited here were freed from all worldly concerns, their only task to think, to study, to write, and to push the boundaries of what was known. The atmosphere was one of sublime, protected quiet, a place where the prevailing sound was the gentle hum of intellectual discovery. Acquiring the scrolls with the magnificent Musaeum built its cool. Quiet halls and endlessly empty shelves stood as a silent challenge. An intellectual paradise was useless without the souls of the departed, the captured thoughts and voices that lay dormant in scrolls across the known world. The task of filling this grand vessel fell to the son of the founder, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, a king who possessed not only his father's ambition, but also a scholar's obsessive passion for collecting. Under his rule, the acquisition of scrolls was transformed from a state policy into a grand, imperial obsession, fueled by the staggering wealth of the kingdom. A new class of royal agent was created. These were not spies or soldiers, but learned men, bibliophiles, fluent in multiple dialects, steeped in literature and philosophy, with purses heavy with royal gold and letters of introduction bearing the king's seal. They were dispatched from Alexandria with a single, all-encompassing mandate to buy everything. Their ships cut through the blue waters of the Mediterranean, fanning out across the known world. They became fixtures in the bustling book markets of Athens and the ancient repositories of Rhodes. They journeyed deep into Asia Minor, seeking out ancient temples where forgotten texts might lie gathering dust. They negotiated in the private libraries of wealthy aristocrats on remote Aegean islands, using persuasion, flattery, and immense sums of money to convince them to part with their family heirlooms. Their mission was one of totality. They were instructed to acquire not just the masterpieces, but everything written, famous plays and obscure poetry, established histories and radical new philosophies, treatises on mathematics, medicine, and music, but also cookbooks, law codes, and farming almanacs. They were to buy multiple copies of the same work, seeking out regional variations and different editorial traditions. The Great Library was not to be a curated collection of approved classics. It was to be a comprehensive, unedited archive of the entire human experience. The most audacious and systematic of their methods, however, took place right in Alexandria's own bustling harbor. By royal decree, a unique and startling law was enforced, as ships from every corner of the world, from Carthage, Syria, Sicily, and beyond, were guided into port by the light of the great pharaoh's lighthouse. They were boarded by Ptolemaic officials, the merchants and captains, expecting the usual inspection of their cargo for taxes, were met instead by a different kind of authority, a quiet, well-dressed official, often a scholar scribe from the Musaeum itself. These men ignored the amphorae of wine and the bales of silk. They had one question: do you possess any books? Any scroll found aboard any vessel, whether it was the property of a wealthy passenger, a learned navigator, or a simple merchant, was subject to immediate confiscation. The scrolls were carefully packed into wooden cases, which were then sealed with the royal insignia of the library and transported by special runners directly to the Musaeum. There they entered the scriptorium, a large, well-lit workshop, humming with the quiet industry of dozens of highly trained scribes. The original scroll would be handed to a master scribe, who would painstakingly unroll the delicate papyrus and begin the slow, meditative work of copying it, letter by letter, onto a fresh roll of the highest quality Egyptian papyrus. The process was checked and rechecked for accuracy by other scholars. Once the copy was complete, it was the new scrollophon of a far superior material and clearer script than the original that was eventually returned to its bewildered owner. The precious original text, meanwhile, was sent to the archives of the Great Library, where it was catalogued, marked with its place of origin, and stored on the cedarwood shelves, now a permanent part of the king's collection. Every ship that sought trade with Alexandria became an unwitting tributary to its intellectual ambition. Perhaps no story better illustrates this combination of scholarly reverence and ruthless determination than that of the official Athenian tragedies. Ptolemy III, Philadelphus's successor, sent a formal embassy to Athens with a respectful request to borrow the city's official state-sanctioned master copies of the plays of the great masters Sophocles and Euripides. These were not common copies. They were national treasures, the authenticated foundation of Athens' cultural identity. The Athenian assembly debated the request with great suspicion. Finally, they agreed, but only after demanding an enormous deposit of 15 talents of silver, a king's ransomers, a guarantee for the scroll's safe return. Ptolemy III agreed to the terms without hesitation, and the silver was paid. The priceless scrolls were sent under armed guard to Alexandria, where they were received with great ceremony. In the scriptorium, the scribes did not just copy them. They created the most magnificent editions imaginable on the finest papyrus, with artistic flourishes. Then, in an act of stunning intellectual piracy, Ptolemy sent these beautiful new copies back to Athens with a polite message. He would be keeping the original master texts for his library. He willingly forfeited the entire 15 talents of silver. considering it a fair purchase price for possessing the authentic heart of Greek literature. Cataloguing the world's knowledge, the relentless success of the Ptolemy's acquisition policy soon created a crisis of its own. A vast, chaotic tide of knowledge flooded the halls of the Musaeum. Every day, more crates arrived from the harbor. More sacks of scrolls were purchased from traveling agents, piling up in the storage rooms, threatening to overwhelm the very institution designed to house them. The library was becoming a victim of its own ambition. It was a labyrinth of papyrus, an ocean of words without a map or a compass. There were tens of thousands, soon to be hundreds of thousands, of scrolls, many arriving without a clear title, an author's name, or even a clear beginning or end. There were multiple, differing copies of the same work, fragments of longer texts, and forgeries mixed in with authentic masterpieces. This magnificent hoard of treasure was in danger of becoming intellectually useless. A book that cannot be found is no different from a book that has been lost. The challenge was monumental, requiring not just clerks to make lists, but a genius of organization to impose a rational order upon the sum of human expression. The man who would rise to this challenge was not merely an administrator, but one of the most celebrated poets of the Hellenistic age, a brilliant and famously cantankerous scholar from the Greek colony of Cyrene, named Callimachus, with a poet's love for the nuances of language and a scientist's passion for classification. He was uniquely suited for the task. Ptolemy to Philadelphus commissioned him to take on this Herculean labor, to create a guide, a definitive map to the entire collection. The result of his life's work was a composition of breathtaking scope and intellectual rigor, a masterwork known as the Pinax or tablets. This was no mere inventory. The Pinax was the world's first comprehensive library catalogue, a critical and biographical encyclopedia of all Greek literature and learning. It was a work of profound scholarship in its own right, a library created for the sole purpose of understanding the library, so vast that it was said to have filled 120 individual scrolls. Callimachus's first move was to divide the universe of knowledge into logical categories. He established major divisions such as rhetoric, law, epic, tragedy, comedy, history, medicine, mathematics, and natural science. This act of classification was in itself a monumental philosophical statement, an attempt to map the very structure of human thought. Within these broad subjects, he organized all known authors alphabetically, a simple but revolutionary innovation that allowed for systematic searching. The true depth of his labor was revealed in the details of each entry. For every single author, Callimachus and his team of assistants compiled a short biography, including their father's name, their birthplace, their known teachers, and a summary of their major achievements. This provided vital context for their work. Then, under each author, he listed all of their known writings. Since many scrolls lacked official titles, he established a definitive fingerprint for each one by recording its incipit, its very first line or sentence. He then meticulously calculated the number of lines in each scroll, which helped researchers understand the scale of the work and verify the completeness of a copy. But the Pinaeus went even further, into the realm of critical judgment. Callimachus was not a passive cataloger. He was an expert arbiter. He would read a text and append his scholarly opinion, noting if its authorship was in dispute, if he believed it to be a later forgery falsely attributed to a famous name, or if it was an authentic but minor work. He was cleaning the intellectual house of the Greek world, sifting through centuries of accumulated texts, sorting the genuine from the spurious, and providing a critical guide for all future scholars. Imagine the years of tireless labor, the quiet, dust-filled rooms, the endless, careful unrolling of fragile ancient papyrus, the scholarly debates over a single word or attribution, the steady rhythmic scratching of reed pens as this colossal intellectual edifice was constructed. With the completion of the Pinaeus, the Great Library was truly born. It was transformed from a chaotic repository into a dynamic, accessible brain for the ancient world. A scholar could now enter its halls, consult the catalogue, and instantly discover everything the library held on a given subject, trace the entire output of a single author, and understand how each work fit into the grand tapestry of knowledge. Callimachus had organized a world of words, and in doing so, had laid the unshakable foundation for the golden age of discovery that was about to dawn. The flourishing of scholarship with the scrolls gathered and the great catalogue complete. The Musaeum was no longer just a beautiful building. It was a charged and living organism. The vast, silent potential contained on its shelves was now unlocked. And for nearly 3 centuries, the Library of Alexandria became the crucible for an unprecedented golden age of discovery. The intellectual gravity of this single institution was so immense that it drew in the finest minds of the Hellenistic world, and the work they produced within its serene walls would redefine the very limits of human knowledge. Every field of inquiry, bathed in the clear light of reason and supported by the wealth of a kingdom, blossomed magnificently in the sun-drenched courtyards and quiet study rooms. The discipline of mathematics reached a state of perfection that would remain unchallenged for 2,000 years. This was the world of Euclid, a figure whose life is shrouded in mystery, but whose work would become one of the most influential texts ever produced. He gathered all the scattered mathematical knowledge of the Greek world, the theorems of Pythagoras, the insights of Plato's Academy, and synthesized it into his masterpiece, The Elements. This was not a mere compilation. It was a breathtaking act of logical construction. Starting with a small set of simple, self-evident definitions and axioms, Euclid built, step by irrefutable step, an entire, self-contained universe of geometry. To read the Elements was to witness the power of pure deduction, an elegant and unassailable chain of logic that became the very model for rational thought. Within the Musaeum, his students would draw his perfect figures in trays of fine sand, learning a system of thought that was as ordered and beautiful as the colonnades that surrounded them. From the abstract perfection of geometry, the scholars of Alexandria turned their gaze to the world itself, seeking to measure and map it with the same precision. The leading figure in this endeavor was the polymath Eratosthenes, a man of staggering intellect, who was appointed head librarian. From his privileged position with access to all the library's reports, he stumbled upon a fascinating detail in a scroll, a note that in the southern city of Syene, on the day of the summer solstice, the midday sun shone directly down a deep well, casting no shadow. Eratosthenes realized the profound implication of this simple observation. If the earth were flat, the same would be true everywhere. But if the earth were a sphere, then on that same day in Alexandria, far to the north, the sun must strike the ground at an angle. His experiment was a model of scientific elegance. On the next summer solstice, he erected a tall obelisk, a gnomon, in Alexandria, and measured the angle of the shadow it cast at noon. It was about 7 degrees, or roughly 1/50th of a full circle. Eratosthenes had previously commissioned royal surveyors to pace out the distance between Syene and Alexandria, which they found to be about 5,000 stadia. With these two pieces of information, he performed a simple calculation and deduced the circumference of the entire planet. His result was astonishingly accurate, off by only a tiny percentage. Within the walls of the library, using nothing more than a stick, a shadow, and the power of reason, he had successfully measured the globe. This outward gaze was matched by an equally revolutionary journey inward into the mysteries of the human body. In the secluded medical wings of the Musaeum, the physician Aerophilus of Chalcedon undertook studies that were radical and, anywhere else in the world, strictly forbidden. Benefiting from the unique intersection of Greek curiosity and Egyptian funerary practices, he was permitted by the Ptolemies to perform the first systematic dissections of human cadavers. For the first time, a physician could observe the inner workings of the body directly, rather than relying on guesswork or analogy. With a steady hand and a keen eye, he traced the intricate pathways of the nervous system, making the momentous discovery that there were two distinct types of nerves, sensory and motorand, that they all originated in the brain. This established the brain, not the heart, as Aristotle had taught, as the seat of consciousness and intelligence. He meticulously described the liver, the spleen, the anatomy of the eye, and the valves of the heart. He was the first to accurately measure the human pulse, using a portable water clock to time its rhythm, and used it as a powerful diagnostic tool. He founded a rational, observational medicine that replaced superstition with science. And while some scholars mapped the world and the body, others dedicated themselves to the library's most precious treasures, its literary texts. Men like Zenodotus of Ephesus, the first head librarian, and the great Aristarchus of Samothrace, undertook the colossal task of creating definitive editions of the Homeric epics. The Iliad and the Odyssey, the foundational poems of Greek culture, had been altered and corrupted over centuries of copyings. These scholars became the first textual critics, collecting every available version of the poems, laying them out on long tables, and painstakingly comparing them line by line. They developed a system of symbols to mark verses they believed were later additions or scribal errors. They wrote extensive commentaries, debated the meaning of archaic words, and established the division of the epics into 24 books that we use to this day. It was a heroic act of literary preservation, ensuring that the voice of Homer would be passed down to posterity in its clearest and most authentic form. Daily life in the library, the great discoveries that echoed out from Alexandria, were not the product of frantic energy, but of a steady, quiet, and profoundly ordered rhythm of life. For the fortunate scholars invited into the Musaeum, a day was a study in tranquility and deep focus, a life intentionally designed by the Ptolemies to be a sanctuary, perfectly insulated from the clamor and distractions of the outside world. A scholar's day began not with a jarring noise, but with a gentle creep of the Egyptian dawn. The first pale light would filter through the high, unadorned windows of their private stone residences within the Musaeum's sprawling complex. They would wake to a stillness so deep it was almost a sound in itself, a silence broken only by the distant cooing of doves in the gardens or the faint, muffled sounds of the port city beginning its daily work miles away. Here, within the royal quarter, was a world of profound peace. All their worldly needs were met by the state. Their meals were prepared, their rooms were tended, their security was absolute. They had only one responsibility: to think. After their morning preparations, they would begin their walk to the great halls of the library. This was not a commute, but a meditative journey. They would step out into the cool morning air and proceed along the vast, covered colonnades. The sound of their sandals on the intricate mosaic floors provided a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the gentle trickle of water from the many fountains that graced the courtyards. They walked through a world of deliberate beauty and order. The low sun cast long, sharp shadows from the forest of marble pillars, and in the gardens on either side, royal botanists could already be seen quietly tending to the living library of plants. The morning dew still clinging to the leaves of exotic specimens from Persia and India. This daily walk was a ritual of separation, a shedding of the mundane as one moved deeper into the sacred precinct of thought. Meals were a crucial and required part of the institutional life. Taken together in the grand dining hall, the suspicion. Here, the profound silence of the library was replaced by a low, respectful hum of intellectual fellowships. It was a rule of the Musaeum that all scholars ate together, a design intended to foster constant, informal collaboration. A geometer, his mind filled with abstract shapes, might find himself seated next to a historian specializing in the Punic Wars. A physician, fresh from his anatomical studies, could fall into conversation with a poet struggling to perfect a line of verse. Over simple, healthy meals of bread, cheese, olives, fruit, and wine, ideas were exchanged. A new theorem might be sketched on a wax tablet, a difficult passage from Plato debated, a strange celestial observation reported by a sailor mulled over and analyzed. It was in this gentle, daily communion that the seeds of interdisciplinary insight were sown. The heart of the day was spent in the great hall, of the library itself, the bibliothot. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the dry, sweet scent of aging papyrus and the faint, preservative aroma of cedar oil. The prevailing sound was a silence born of immense, shared concentration. A scholar would first consult the pinakes to identify the scrolls they needed. An attendant, a silent functionary of knowledge, would then glide into the archives and return with the requested papyri. The scholar would take the scrolls to one of the long, polished wooden reading tables. The ritual of study would begin with the careful unrolling of the scroll, the smooth, cool feel of the wooden rods at its ends, the soft crackle of the papyrus itself. The only sounds for hours on end would be the near-inaudible scratching of a reed pen. A calamus, as a scholar took notes on a cheaper sheet of papyrus, and the whisper of a tunic against a stone bench. Time was marked only by the slow, deliberate march of a sunbeam across the floor as it moved from one column to the next. As evening approached and the natural light began to fade, the atmosphere shifted. Attendants would move silently through the vast hall, their movements practiced and discreet. One by one, they would light the hundreds of oil lamps, their soft, warm, flickering glow creating intimate pools of light around each reader. The deep shadows of the hall would retreat, and the space would become a warm, illuminated haven against the darkness outside. The soft hiss and pop of the burning wicks would join the quiet symphony of study, allowing the work to continue late into the night. A day in the Great Library was a seamless immersion in the world of ideas, a protected and sacred rhythm, beginning and ending in a profound peace that was the true source of its genius. Key discoveries and thinkers. The tranquil daily life of the Musaeum was the fertile soil in which giants grew. And the golden age of Alexandria is best understood through the stories of the remarkable individuals who walked its colonnades. The library did not just collect knowledge, it collected geniuses, and in doing so, it became a stage for some of the most dazzling intellectual performances in human history, producing insights that would echo for millennia. Wandering the workshops of the Musaeum, one might have encountered a man named Hero, or Heron of Alexandria, a brilliant mathematician and engineer whose work seemed to border on magic. His personal workshop was a wonderland of human ingenuity, a space filled with gears, levers, automata, and complex diagrams drawn on papyrus. He was a master of pneumatics and mechanics, creating devices that astonished and delighted. For the temples, he designed what might be considered the world's first vending machine, a bronze vessel that, when a coin of a certain weight was dropped into a slot, would dispense a measured amount of holy water for worshippers. His most theatrical invention was a mechanism for temples, where the lighting of a fire on the main altar would cause the massive, heavy front doors to swing open automatically, as if by divine intervention, creating a moment of profound awe for the assembled crowd. Hero's most famous creation, however, was a deceptively simple device known as the Aeolipile. It consisted of a hollow sphere, often made of bronze, mounted on a pair of pivots above a sealed cauldron of water. As a fire heated the cauldron, steam would travel up pipes into the sphere and then jet out from two L-shaped nozzles on opposite sides. This action would cause the sphere to spin at incredible speeds, whining and hissing like a captured storm, while it was treated as a fascinating novelty, a dormer or wonder with no practical purpose. Hidden within this spinning toy was the fundamental principle of the steam engine, the concept of reactive thrust that would one day power locomotives and reshape the world. Hero had stumbled upon a world-changing secret, but he was so far ahead of his time that it remained a curiosity, a testament to the incredible, untapped potential brewing within the library's walls. Though he lived and worked in the city-state of Syracuse in Sicily, the great Archimedes was a vital part of the library's intellectual network. He was a constant and eager correspondent with the scholars of Alexandria, particularly his friend Eratosthenes. He would send them his latest, groundbreaking proofs on scrolls, challenging them to find flaws in his reasoning and trusting their minds to be the first to appreciate his work. The story of his most famous discovery likely spread like wildfire through the Musaeum's dining hall. The tale tells of how his king, Hiro II, commissioned a new golden crown and suspected the goldsmith of having mixed in cheaper silver. The king tasked Archimedes with determining the crown's purity without damaging it. Vexed by the problem, Archimedes went to the public baths to relax. As he stepped into a full tub, he watched the water spill over the sides and, in a flash of pure genius, made the connection he had been seeking. The volume of the water that spilled out was equal to the volume of his own submerged body. He realized he could measure the crown's volume by submerging it, and by knowing its weight he could calculate its density and thus prove its purity. Legend says he was so overcome with joy that he leaped from the bath and ran naked through the streets of Syracuse, shouting, "Eureka, Eureka, I have found it." It was a perfect testament to the scientific spirit, a profound physical law, revealed in a moment of simple, everyday observation. A more austere and purely abstract mind belonged to Apollonius of Perga, a man so skilled he was known to his contemporaries as the Great Geometer. He devoted his life to a singular, focused obsession, the study of the simple cone. In his quiet study, surrounded by wax and wooden models, he explored what happened when you sliced a cone at every conceivable angle. In his masterwork, Conics, he described the hidden family of beautiful curves that this process revealed. A shallow slice produced the perfect closed loop he named the ellipse. A slice made parallel to the cone's sloping side revealed the endless, open arms of the parabola, and a steeper slice, cutting through both halves of a double cone, produced the two symmetrical, opposing curves of the hyperbola. For 17 centuries, this work was preserved on the library's shelves, a masterpiece of pure mathematics with no obvious practical use. It was not until the early 17th century that the astronomer Johannes Kepler, struggling to understand the erratic orbits of the planets, found the answer not in perfect circles, but in the ancient scrolls of Apollonius. The planets, he discovered, moved in ellipses. The abstract intellectual beauty explored in the quiet of Alexandria had nearly 2 millennia later become the key to mapping the heavens. The library as a cultural hub, the Musaeum, For all its cloistered tranquility and its dedication to pure thought was not an isolated ivory tower. It was the serene, beating heart of Alexandria, and its influence pulsed outwards, shaping the very character of the city and making it the undisputed cultural capital of the known world. To step outside the cool, shaded colonnades of the royal quarter was to plunge into a vibrant, chaotic symphony of human civilization, a city whose energy was fed by the confluence of 3 continents. The avenues of Alexandria teemed with a diversity unlike anywhere else on earth. Beer, thick with the salty temps of the Mediterranean, carried 1,000 different scents. The sweet smoke of Nubian incense from the temples, the sharp aroma of exotic spices from the markets of the East, the smell of fresh fish from the harbor docks, the dominant Greek of the scholars and soldiers mingled with the ancient dialects of the native Egyptian priests, the Aramaic of Jewish merchants, the Latin of Roman traders, and the tongues of Persian diplomats, Indian emissaries, and Celtic mercenaries, under the constant, watchful eye of the great Pharos lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Ships from every corner of the sea crowded the double harbor, their riggings a dense forest of masts. They brought not just cargo, but new ideas, new religions, and new questions that would find their way into the city's endless debate. In the midst of this cosmopolitan swirl, the library stood as the city's anchor and its greatest source of pride. Its intellectual gravity was immense, a powerful magnet that drew the ambitious and the curious from across the globe. It was not only the world's most brilliant, established scholars who were invited to work there. Aspiring young students flocked to the city, hoping to study at the feet of the masters. Wealthy patrons made pilgrimages to Alexandria, eager to burnish their own legacies by endowing scholarships or donating rare scrolls to the collection. The library made Alexandria the ultimate destination, a place where a person's worth was measured not just by their wealth or military prowess, but by their learning. The library became the ultimate bridge between cultures, a place where different worlds of thought were not only collected but actively translated and interpreted for one another. The most monumental example of this was the creation of the King Ptolemy II, driven by his desire for intellectual completeness, recognized that his universal library was lacking the foundational texts of his city's large and influential Jewish population. He commissioned a grand project to translate the sacred Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Legend holds that 72 Jewish elders, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, were summoned to Alexandria. They were housed in seclusion on the beautiful island of Pharos and tasked with producing a translation. After 72 days of labor, the story goes, they emerged to find that each of them had produced a perfect, identical text. Whether the story of this miracle is literal or a beautiful myth, its significance is profound. The creation of the Septuagint was the first major act of sacred translation in Western history. It unlocked the Hebrew Bible for the entire Greek-speaking world, including the many Hellenized Jews who no longer read Hebrew. This single act of scholarship, born from the library's ambition, created a crucial bridge between the Hebraic and Hellenistic intellectual traditions. fundamentally shaping the future course of Western religion and philosophy. While access to the scrolls themselves was a privilege, the knowledge generated within the Musaeum's walls radiated outwards. The great thinkers gave public lectures in the city's gymnasia. The children of the Alexandrian elite received the finest education imaginable from tutors steeped in the library's traditions. The engineering feats seen in the city's architecture, the advanced medical care available from its physicians, the quality of the maps used by its sea captain's oar were touched by the work being done in the Musaeum. The city of Alexandria itself became a brand, synonymous with learning and sophistication. To be an Alexandrian was to be a citizen of the intellectual capital of the planet, where the quiet pursuit of knowledge had become the city's most celebrated and enduring enterprise. Internal strife and political turmoil, no golden age, however brilliant, can last forever. The magnificent intellectual flame of the Great Library, which had burned so brightly for centuries, required a constant and steady supply of fuel. The peace of the kingdom, the stability of its government, and the unwavering patronage of wise rulers. For generations, the early Ptolemies had provided this shelter, but the strength of their line, like all dynasties, began to wane. Their successors were often little more than paranoid despots, embroiled in vicious family feuds that tore the kingdom apart. The court of Alexandria, once a center of sophisticated Hellenistic culture, devolved into a nest of intrigue, assassinations, and bloody civil wars. Brother turned against sister, mother against son, all vying for control of the throne of Egypt. The descendants of Alexander's canny general grew weaker, more decadent, and dangerously consumed by internal rivalries. The political ground beneath the Musaeum, once so solid, began to shift and crack, and the first shadows to fall upon the library were cast not by a foreign invader, but from within the opulent halls of the royal palace itself. The early Ptolemies had been soldiers and statesmen who understood the strategic value of knowledge. The vast wealth of the kingdom was no longer lavished on acquiring the world's wisdom, but on hiring mercenary armies and funding the decadent lifestyles of an increasingly insecure monarchy. In this toxic climate of paranoia, the Musaeum itself began to be seen in a different light. The international community of scholars, once the jewel in the Ptolemaic crown, came to be viewed with suspicion. These brilliant foreigners, with their independent minds and connections to rival kingdoms, were a source of anxiety for insecure rulers. Their philosophical debates could be misconstrued as political dissent, their historical inquiries seen as critiques of the current regime. The very freedom of thought that had been the library's lifeblood now became a perceived threat. The most catastrophic blow, the moment the intellectual dream turned into a political nightmare, came in the year 145 BC, during the reign of Ptolemy VIII, Euergetes II. He was a man so notoriously cruel, vindictive, and physically bloated that he was given the derisive nickname Faiscan, or Potbelly, after seizing the throne in a brutal civil war against his own family. He harbored a deep and violent resentment toward the Greek intellectual class of Alexandria, whom he believed had supported his rivals. He unleashed a ruthless purge. The peace of the royal quarter was shattered by the tramp of soldiers' boots. Scholars were dragged from their studies, arrested, executed, or forced to flee for their lives. The idyllic sanctuary of the Musaeum was irrevocably broken. The global community of genius, so carefully assembled and nurtured over a century and a half, was shattered overnight. The head librarian himself, the revered Aristarchus of Samothrace, the world's foremost authority on the Homeric epics, was forced to escape to Cyprus, where he died in exile. He was not alone. Countless others philosophers, geometers, physicians, and poets fled the city. A diaspora of brilliance scattering across the Mediterranean. A contemporary chronicler wrote grimly that the purge had filled the islands and the towns with grammarians, philosophers, geometers, musicians, painters, trainers, physicians and other craftsmen who, driven into poverty by their exile, were now forced to teach what they knew to survive. Alexandria's profound loss became the wider world's gain. But the Musaeum was left a hollow shell of its former self. A chill of fear descended upon its quiet halls. The scholars who remained and the new ones appointed for their political loyalty rather than their intellectual merit learned to tread carefully. The spirit of bold, fearless inquiry, of challenging established dogma, was extinguished. It was replaced by a more cautious, timid scholasticism that focused on the safe, non-controversial work of merely preserving and commenting on the knowledge of the past. The engine of discovery had seized the first and perhaps deepest wound to the Great Library was not inflicted by fire or an angry mob, but by its own king. The slow, creeping rot of political turmoil had poisoned the institution from within, leaving it weakened, demoralized, and vulnerable to the physical destruction that the coming centuries of war and conflict would inevitably bring. The first potential loss, Julius Caesar's fire 48 BC, a century after the internal purges of Ptolemy, Physcon had wounded the library's spirit. A new and far greater power had risen to dominate the Mediterranean world. The shadow of Rome, once a distant republic, now stretched across the sea, and its ambitions inevitably entangled it in the affairs of a weakened and fractious Egypt. In the year 48 BC, this shadow took the form of one of history's most formidable figures, the Roman general Julius Caesar. He arrived in the city of Alexandria not as a scholar to marvel at its accumulated wisdom, but as a political arbiter in yet another bitter Egyptian civil war, this one raging between the brilliant young queen, Cleopatra VII, and her even younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII. Caesar entered a city that was a cauldron of political tension and simmering resentment towards Roman interference. He established his small Roman force within the royal quarter, the Bruchian, dangerously underestimating the strength of the forces loyal to the young king. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Caesar, who had thrown his support behind Cleopatra, soon found himself besieged within the palace complex. The Egyptian army, vastly outnumbering his own legions, controlled the city, and their powerful fleet commanded the great harbor, cutting off Caesar's supplies and his only route of escape. Trapped with his back to the sea, the Roman general made a desperate and ruthless tactical decision to prevent the enemy fleet from being used to land troops behind his lines and overwhelm his position. He ordered his soldiers to set fire to the Egyptian ships anchored in the port. It was a decision made in the heat of war, a brutal act of military necessity that would have unforeseen and devastating consequences. A strong sea breeze, blowing in from the Mediterranean, fanned the flames with terrifying speed. The fire leaped from the tarred rigging and dry wooden hulls of the ships and carried by the wind, jumped to the docks and the crowded warehouses that lined the waterfront. A great black plume of smoke, thick with the scent of burning wood, grain, and ominously papyrus, rose over the city. Panic spread through the streets as the inferno, now far beyond anyone's control, began to consume the buildings in the port district. And it is here, in the smoke and chaos of that day, that the clear narrative of history becomes murky, blurring into legend and impassioned debate. In the aftermath of this fire, a story of terrible loss was born, a story that would echo through the ages. The Roman philosopher Seneca, writing a century later, famously claimed that 40,000 scrolls were destroyed in the blaze that day. This account painted a picture of a singular cultural cataclysm, an inferno that devoured a vast portion of the world's knowledge in a single afternoon. One can imagine the horror. Warehouses near the harbor, perhaps filled with scrolls recently acquired from ships, or copies being prepared for export, or simply an overflow collection from the main library, suddenly turning to brittle ash and smoke. Yet other evidence tells a different, more complicated story. The Musaeum and the main library building itself were located some distance from the docks, protected within the strong stone walls of the palace compound. Many historians argue that the main institution, the heart of the great collection, likely survived the fire entirely. Indeed, contemporary writers, including Caesar himself, in his own detailed account of the Alexandrian War, make no mention of the library burning. The geographer Strabo, visiting Alexandria just 2 decades later, described the Musaeum as a vibrant, functioning institution, and scholars are recorded as continuing their work there for centuries after Caesar sailed away. The precise truth is likely lost to us, obscured by the fog of war and the exaggerations of later writers. The legend of the Great Library being completely destroyed by Caesar is almost certainly untrue. However, it is highly probable that a significant and priceless collection of scrolls, stored in warehouses by the port, was indeed consumed by the flames. This fire, then, was not the final death blow, but it was the first deep, physical wound inflicted upon the library by the outside world. It was a brutal demonstration that the sanctuary of knowledge was no longer immune to the violent conflicts of ambitious men. The flames in the harbor were a terrible omen, the first fiery gash in a long, slow process of decline, proving that what had been so carefully built over generations could be carelessly and irrevocably destroyed. Later destructions and losses, the fire started by Caesar's desperate gamble, was not the end, but a grim foreshadowing of the library's vulnerability. The great institution did not meet its demise in a single, spectacular inferno. Rather, it suffered a long and agonizing decline, a slow unraveling that stretched over centuries of conflict, neglect, and profound ideological change. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, as the world that had created it slowly crumbled and was replaced by a new one. The long twilight began with the death of Cleopatra and the formal absorption of Egypt into the Roman Empire. Alexandria, once the proud capital of a vibrant kingdom, was demoted to the status of a provincial capital. The lavish state funding from the Ptolemaic treasury, the very lifeblood of the Musaeum, dried up. The relentless acquisition of new scrolls ceased entirely, and even the preservation of the existing collection became a struggle. The grand buildings, no longer maintained with royal pride, would have begun to show the signs of slow decay. The community of scholars dwindled, the generous stipends became less certain, and the institution's central importance began to fade. A far more devastating physical blow likely came during the chaotic crisis of the 3rd century, a period when the Roman Empire was torn apart by constant civil war. In the 270s AD, the ambitious Queen Zenobia of the Palmyrene Empire broke away from Rome and conquered the vital province of Egypt. The Roman Emperor Aurelian, a stern military man, led a massive army to reclaim the city. The ensuing battle was not a tidy siege at the walls, but brutal, street-to-street urban warfare. The fighting was fiercest, ancient sources tell us. In the city's wealthiest and oldest district, the Brachyon, the original royal quarter. In the devastating struggle to retake the city, this entire section of Alexandria was laid to waste, so thoroughly ravaged that it was largely abandoned afterward, while no specific chronicle survives to tell of the library's fate in this battle. It is almost impossible to imagine the ancient buildings of the Musaeum surviving such a cataclysm. The original Great Library, the institution of Euclid and Eratosthenes, was almost certainly a casualty of this imperial conflict. It wasn't specifically targeted for its knowledge. It was simply in the way of clashing Roman legions. Its priceless contents turned to rubble and dust, along with the palaces and temples that surrounded it. Its end was likely not a famous fire, but a quiet, unrecorded collapse in the chaos of a forgotten war. Yet, the spirit of Alexandrian scholarship endured, for a time, in another location. On a prominent hill in the city stood the magnificent and holy temple of the Serapeum, a grand complex dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis. This temple housed a smaller but still immense daughter library, which, after the destruction of the Brachyon, had become the primary intellectual center of the city. But the world was changing in ways more profound than the shifting of armies. Christianity, once a persecuted sect, was now the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, and its fervent, monotheistic faith stood in stark opposition to the pagan traditions that had built the Serapeum and filled its library with classical philosophy and science. Alexandria became a city of fierce and often violent religious tension. The knowledge contained in the scrolls of the Serapeum was no longer seen by all as universal wisdom, but by the city's powerful new Christian leadership as dangerous pagan heresy. The breaking point came in the year 391 AD. The Roman Emperor Theodosius I, seeking to unify his empire under a single faith, issued a decree outlawing all pagan worship. Empowered by this imperial edict, the zealous and powerful Christian patriarch of Alexandria, Theophilus, incited a mob of his followers to attack and destroy the Serapeum, which he saw as a defiant bastion of heathenism. The city's last pagan philosophers and their followers made a desperate stand within the temple walls, but they were overwhelmed. The crowd surged in, smashed the colossal cult statue of Serapis, and tore the temple complex apart. In this wave of iconoclastic fury, the scrolls of the daughter library were likely scattered, neglected, or actively destroyed, their wisdom condemned as demonic falsehoods. This event is often seen as the true, symbolic end of the classical intellectual tradition in Alexandria. Centuries later, a final, dramatic story would be told. The legend, first appearing in the 13th century, tells of the Arab conquest of Alexandria in 642 AD. In this tale, the victorious general, Amr ibn Alas, asked the Caliph Omar what to do with the city's fabled library. The Caliph is said to have replied with the famous words, "If what is written in them agrees with the Book of God, they are not required. If it disagrees, they are not desired. Destroy them." The scrolls were then supposedly distributed to the city's 4,000 bathhouses, where they fueled the fires for 6 months. It is a powerful, terrible image, but nearly all modern historians agree that it is a myth, a piece of political folklore created centuries after the event. By the 7th century, after the catastrophes of the Bruchion and the Serapeum, it is tragically unlikely that any centralized collection of scrolls worthy of the name Great Library remained to be burned. The lingering mystery, and so, the Great Library of Alexandria passes from the solid ground of history into the hazy, shimmering realm of legend. There is no single, definitive date on a calendar marking its end, no dramatic account of the final scroll being consumed by the final fire. There is only a profound and lingering silence, and a mystery that has haunted scholars and dreamers for centuries. The ultimate mystery is not simply how the library was destroyed, but the staggering, unimaginable scope of what was lost forever. Who, then, was the culprit? Was it the thoughtless fire of Caesar's war, the destructive rampage of Aurelian's legions, the righteous fury of Theophilus' mob, the cold neglect of Roman emperors, the apocryphal command of a pious caliph? The answer, as unsatisfying as it is true, is that there was no single culprit. The library was not murdered in a single, swift act. It died a slow, agonizing death from 1,000 cuts, inflicted over the course of half a millennium. It was wounded by the paranoia of its own kings, starved by the neglect of its foreign masters, battered by the collateral damage of endless wars, and finally torn apart by the zealotry of a new world that saw its wisdom as heresy. Time and human folly were the true destroyer. But the question of how it vanished ultimately pales in comparison to the unanswerable question of what vanished with it. This is the ghost that haunts us, We are left to wander the ruins of a library we cannot see, to mourn for books whose very titles are unknown to us. The scale of the loss is difficult for the modern mind to comprehend. We know, for instance, that the three great Athenian tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, wrote more than 300 plays between them. Of that vast foundational body of work, only about 30 have survived to our time. Where are the rest? What masterpieces of drama, what profound insights into the human condition were contained in the more than 90% of their life's work that has disappeared. We mourn the loss of history itself. The library held the definitive 30-volume history of Egypt, written in Greek by the native priest, Manetho, a work that would have given us a complete chronicle of the pharaohs as they saw themselves. Today, we have only fragmented summaries and king lists quoted by later, often unreliable, authors. It held the complete history of Babylonia, written by the priest Berosus. It held the first-hand accounts of Alexander's campaigns, written by his own generals, like Ptolemy himself. We are left with only later, second-hand compilations. What secrets of science were lost? Did the complete astronomical charts of Hipparchus, who meticulously catalogued the stars, contain data that would have accelerated our understanding of the cosmos? Did the full anatomical treatises of Eratosthenes contain medical knowledge that took another 2,000 years to rediscover? What of philosophy? We know the pre-Socratic thinkers like Heraclitus and Parmenides only through scattered cryptic fragments quoted by others. The library held their complete works, their full, nuanced arguments, which we are now forced to reconstruct like paleontologists trying to imagine a complete animal from a single shard of bone. The loss of the library was not like losing a shelf of books. It was like losing the entire internet of the ancient world. By it was the central server, the master database that held not just the individual works, but the connections between them. It held the commentaries, the criticisms, the scholarly debates that formed the rich intellectual conversation of antiquity. Without it, we are left with a scattered and broken puzzle, and the box with the picture of how it all fits together has been burned. This is the lingering mystery of Alexandria, not a puzzle to be solved, but a void to be contemplated. The silence it left behind is its most powerful and sorrowful legacy. The enduring impact of the library. It would be easy to let the story of the Great Library end in the sorrowful silence of its destruction, to see it only as a monument to loss, a ghost of a forgotten golden age. But to do so would be to miss its most profound and astonishing legacy. The physical library, the building of marble and the shelves of papyrus, was mortal. But the idea it represented, the intellectual fire it ignited, proved to be indestructible. Though the great trunk of the tree was felled and its branches burned, its seeds had already been carried on the wind for centuries, taking root in the most distant and unexpected soils. The true impact of the library is found not in its ashes, but in the living forest that grew from them. The first part of this legacy was carried away by the very scholars who were forced to flee its decline. The great minds driven out by the purges of Ptolemy Physcon, or who left as the city's stability waned, became intellectual missionaries. They were living libraries, carrying the rigorous methods and scholarly ideals of the Musaeum with them across the Mediterranean. In cities like Rhodes, Athens, and Rome, they founded new schools, tutored the children of the elite, and established smaller, influential libraries modeled on the Alexandrian ideal. They taught the techniques of textual criticism, the systematic approach to grammar, the importance of creating authoritative editions of classic works, and the philosophical commitment to reason and evidence. They were apostles of a new kind of intellectual rigor, and they planted the DNA of Alexandrian scholarship throughout the Greco-Roman world. Centuries later, as the Western Roman Empire crumbled and Europe entered a period of intellectual fragmentation, the surviving knowledge found new, vital sanctuaries. Many of the classical Greek texts preserved in the Alexandrian tradition were carefully copied and studied in the great libraries of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople. Even more consequentially, the rise of the Islamic Golden Age created a new and fervent appetite for this ancient wisdom. Binned intellectual centers like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba, a massive translation movement began, an effort that consciously echoed the ambition of the first Ptolemies. Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars worked side by side in places like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad to translate the works of Euclid, Ptolemy, Aristotle, and the great medical writer Galen from Greek into Syriac and then into Arabic. They did not simply preserve this knowledge. They absorbed it, commented upon it, and built upon it, making staggering advances of their own in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. It was through this long, winding path that the spirit of Alexandria returned to a slumbering Europe. During the later Middle Ages, this vast body of classical knowledge, enriched by centuries of Islamic scholarship, began to trickle back into the West, primarily through the vibrant cultural crossroads of Moorish Spain and Sicily. European scholars, rediscovering the thoughts of Aristotle and the geometry of Euclid, first in Arabic translations and then in the original Greek sought from Constantinople, experienced a profound intellectual awakening. This rediscovery of the classical past was a primary catalyst for the European Renaissance, a rebirth of art, science, and humanism that was fueled by the knowledge that had been preserved and curated in the tradition of the Great Library. The imprint of Alexandria is woven into the very fabric of our modern world. The concept of a secular research university, an institution where scholars are supported to pursue knowledge for its own sake, complete with libraries, lecture halls, and research facilities, is a direct descendant of the Musaeum. The scientific method owes a profound debt to the library's emphasis on empirical observation in medicine and geography, and its commitment to rigorous logic in mathematics. Even the book as we know it, with its stable text, divisions into chapters, and established grammar, was shaped by the meticulous work of the Alexandrian critics. The library's truest legacy, therefore, was not a collection of scrolls, but a blueprint for how to think. It championed reason, critical analysis, and the optimistic belief that all knowledge is interconnected and worthy of preservation. The physical library was gone, but the intellectual architecture it created remains the invisible foundation upon which much of our modern world of learning is built. Modern echoes and revivals the dream of Alexandria, so powerful in its conception and so tragic in its decline, never truly died. It lingered in the collective consciousness of the world, a potent symbol of a lost paradise of knowledge, an unspoken challenge whispered through the centuries to one day rebuild what had been lost. For most of history, this was merely a fantasy. But at the close of the 20th century, in an extraordinary act of global cooperation and profound optimism, the dream was finally renewed in granite, glass, and steel, on the very same shores where it was first born. Rising from the waterfront of the modern city, looking out over the same shimmering expanse of the Mediterranean Sea as its ancient predecessor, is a magnificent new structure, the Bibliotheca Alexandria. It is not, and could not be, a replica of the ancient Musaeum. Instead, it is a stunning modern reimagining, a contemporary echo of the original's audacious spirit. The project was conceived not just by Egypt, but by the entire world, with UNESCO and nations from every continent contributing funds and expertise. It was a global acknowledgement that the legacy of the Great Library belongs to all of humanity, and its revival should be a shared endeavor. The building itself is a masterpiece of symbolic architecture. The main structure is a vast circular disk of granite and glass, tilted towards the sea as if it were the sun of knowledge itself, half risen from the earth. The design is a powerful metaphor, the sun of the past, representing the ancient library, is rising once again to illuminate the future. Its enormous, sloping roof is a marvel of engineering, a grid of glass and aluminum panels with specially designed skylights that allow the vast interior to be bathed in a soft, diffuse northern light, protecting the precious books from the direct, damaging heat of the southern sun. A modern, technological solution to an ancient librarian's problem. The most striking feature is the immense curved outer wall. It is clad in massive panels of grey granite, brought from Aswan in the south of Egypt, the same region that supplied the stone for the pharaoh's greatest monuments. Carved into the surface of these thousands of panels, in a beautiful and intricate tapestry, are the letters and characters of every known alphabet from throughout human history, from ancient hieroglyphs to modern scripts. The wall is a testament to the new library's core mission, to embrace and celebrate the stories, the languages, and the wisdom of all peoples, from all cultures, across all of time. To step inside is to enter a cathedral of knowledge. The main reading room is a breathtaking, cavernous space, the largest in the world. It cascades downwards in a series of 7 vast terraces, representing the different fields of learning, able to hold thousands of readers and millions of books. But like its ancient forerunner, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina is far more than just a place to store books. It is a sprawling cultural complex. It houses for specialized libraries, for museums including a stunning antiquities museum, displaying priceless artifacts discovered during the building's own constructions, several art galleries for both permanent and temporary exhibitions, and a state-of-the-art planetarium that brings the wonders of the cosmos to its visitors. The mission of this new institution is not to reclaim the lost scrolls of the past, an impossible task. Its aim is to rekindle the original spirit. It seeks to be a leading center for education, tolerance, dialogue, and understanding in a region often fraught with conflict. It hosts international conferences, lectures, and debates, actively promoting the open inquiry that the first Musaeum championed. And it embraces the modern equivalent of the papyrus scroll, digital information, put with a massive digital archive and a commitment to information science. It seeks to fulfill the ancient dream of universal access with the most powerful tools of the modern age. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina stands today as a profound act of hope, a defiant statement that the destructive forces of history do not get the final word. It is a promise to the past and a commitment to the future, ensuring that the great flame of knowledge, once extinguished in Alexandria, now burns there brightly once more. A call for quiet reflection. Our long journey through time is now at its end. We have stood on a windswept shore with Alexander and shared in his dream. We have walked the sunlit colonnades of the Musaeum, surrounded by the quiet hum of discovery. We have felt the chill of the long shadows of war and politics, and we have stood in the profound silence left by the library's passing. And finally, we have seen its spirit, like a new sun, rise again from the shores of the Mediterranean. The story of the Library of Alexandria, in all its glory and its tragedy, is the story of humanity's highest aspirations and its most heartbreaking failures. And now, as the grand tale fades, let the epic sweep of history fall away. Let the names of kings and scholars, the dates of battles, and the catalogue of losses gently dissolve. Turn your thoughts inward, to a place of even greater quiet and mystery, the library that exists within your own mind. For, in a way, each of us carries a sanctuary of knowledge inside us. It is a vast and unique collection, built over a lifetime, filled with every memory you have ever made, every face you have ever loved, every story you have ever been told, every private hope and every quiet sorrow. Its shelves hold the lessons of your past and the dreams for your future. This inner library is your most precious and personal possession. It is your own house of the muses. Tend to this inner library with gentleness and care. Value its contents. Pair and cherish the quiet, steady flame of your own curiosity. The same fundamental spirit that drove Eratosthenes to measure the world, or Telemachus to catalogue its knowledge, is alive in you. It is present in the simple, wonderful impulse to learn something new, to read one more chapter of a book before you sleep, to pause and wonder at the stars, to ask why. This curiosity is a precious gift. It is the engine of all discovery, great and small. Nurture it. Let the story of Alexandria now become a soft echo in the background of your thoughts. Let the images of marble halls and burning scrolls, of ancient scholars and modern architects all recede, becoming part of the vast collection you already hold. There is nothing left to do but to let go. There are no more stories to tell. no more histories to unravel. There is only this present moment of peace. Listen only to the gentle, steady crackle of the fire, a sound of simple comfort, of warmth, of safety. It is the sound of the world settling into the quiet of the night. The dust motes danced like tiny, golden insects in the shafts of afternoon light that pierced the high windows of the great hall. For Damon, a young scholar from the island of Rhodes, this light was the most beautiful thing in the world. He had been at the Musaeum for nearly 2 years, a privilege that still felt as fragile and precious as the oldest scrolls in the archives. His own work was humble. He was a junior grammarian, tasked with comparing different copies of plays by the comic poet Aristophanes, noting the variations in a neat, precise hand. It was meticulous, often tedious work, but it placed him here in the quiet heart of all knowledge, and for that he was endlessly grateful. His master, the revered Lycomedes, was a stern but brilliant man, a senior scholar on the verge of completing a definitive commentary on the works of the philosopher Heraclitus. Heraclitus was notoriously difficult, known as the Obscure for his cryptic, paradoxical sayings. Lycomedes had spent 2 decades wrestling with his thoughts, and his work was eagerly anticipated. One sweltering afternoon, Lycomedes summoned Damon to his private study. The old scholar looked haggard, his eyes redrimmed from lack of sleep. On his reading table, 2 scrolls lay side by side. "Damon," he said, his voice raspy, "I have a problem, a terrible problem." He gestured to the scrolls. "For 20 years, my work has been based on this copy of Heraclitus." He pointed to the scroll on the right. Its papyrus yellowed with age, the one we have always considered the most complete. But yesterday, an agent from Ephesus brought this new acquisition. He pointed to the scroll on the left, its papyrus paler, the script slightly different. It contains a fragment, just 6 lines, that does not exist in any other known copy. Damon leaned closer. Lycomedes had transcribed the 6 lines onto a wax tablet. They read, "The sun is new again, yet it is the oldest fire. To step into the same river is to be cleansed by a stranger. What is not. What is not, becomes. Do not seek the fire, seek the space it has warmed. For the truth is not the flame, but the memory of its heat." Damon felt a shiver run down his spine. The words were undeniably in the style of Heraclitus, yet they held a clarity, a haunting simplicity that was different. "This changes everything," Lycomedes whispered, his face pale. "My entire interpretation of his philosophy of flux is built on the idea of the ever-changing river. But this speaks of memory, of a lingering presence. If this fragment is authentic, 20 years of my work may be ... incomplete, wrong." He looked at Damon, his gaze heavy with desperation. "The new scroll claims to have been copied from a text held in the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, which burned 50 years ago. There is no way to verify its source, but I must know. I cannot finish my work while this doubt poisons it. I am too old, too tired to make the journey. Damon ... you will go for me. You will go to Ephesus. Damon stood frozen in the cool, papyrus-scented air of the study. The weight of his master's words settled upon him, a burden of trust so immense it was terrifying. For a junior scholar to be given such a mission was unheard of. It was a task for a senior fellow, a man of reputation and experience. He, Damon, was merely a careful pair of eyes, a polisher of other men's work, to be sent as an agent of the Musaeum, to travel across the sea and solve a mystery that held the life's work of Lycomedes in the balance. It was the most exhilarating and frightening moment of his life. He bowed his head, his heart pounding. "Master," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I will not fail you." The preparations were swift. The Musaeum, when set on a course of inquiry, moved with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Damon was granted an audience with the head librarian himself, a man whose intellectual authority was second only to the king. From the bursar's office, he received a small leather pouch heavy with silver drachmas for his expenses. More importantly, he was given a sealed scroll containing letters of introduction, stamped with the wax seal of the Libraria symbol that would open doors and command respect throughout the Hellenistic world. He spent the evening in his own small quarters, not sleeping, but meticulously recopying the 6 cryptic lines onto a fresh wax tablet, his hand trembling slightly. This small tablet was now the focus of his entire world. Leaving the serene, ordered precinct of the Musaeum the next morning was like stepping into another reality. He walked through the canopic gate and was immediately swept up in the chaotic, vibrant life of the city. The air was thick with the smells of baking bread, sea salt, and sweat. The streets were a cacophony of shouting vendors, braying donkeys, and the rumble of cartwheels on stone. He navigated the crowded avenues towards the great harbor, the colossal finger of the Pharos lighthouse, his constant guide. There, the chaos intensified. Sailors from every nation shouted in a dozen different tongues, loading and unloading cargo from the forest of ships whose masts swayed gently against the brilliant blue sky. He found the merchant vessel Lycomedes had arranged passage and a wide-beamed trading ship named the Sea Nymph, bound for Ephesus with a cargo of Egyptian grain and fine linen. As Damon boarded, clutching his small satchel containing the letters and the precious wax tablet, he felt a profound sense of dislocation. He was leaving the world of pure thought for the world of rough, practical men. The journey across the great sea took 10 days. The rhythm of the ship was one of wood creaking, ropes straining, and the endless hiss of the waves. At night, Damon would stand at the ship's railing, watching the familiar constellations wheel across a sky of impossible clarity. The world felt vast and ancient. During the day, while the sailors worked, he would find a quiet corner and stare at the 6 lines of text. The truth is not the flame, but the memory of its heat. What did it mean? He had read all the known works of Heraclitus, the fragments that spoke of constant change, of war as the father of all things, of the world as an ever-living fire. Those ideas were sharp, forceful, almost violent. These new lines felt different. They were melancholic, imbued with a sense of lingering, of presence in absence. They felt like an echo, a memory. The ship's captain, a gruff, sun-weathered man named Phoebus, found him studying the tablet one afternoon. "A scholar's work?" he asked, peering at the strange words. Damon explained his mission in simple terms. Phoebus laughed, a deep, booming sound. "All this way for a handful of words from a man dead 300 years. The world is a strange place. I follow the stars I can see, and the winds I can feel. A man's ghost has never filled my sails." Damon simply nodded, unable to explain the chasm between their two worlds. Phoebus saw the world as it was. The scholars of the library were obsessed with the world as it was thought, as it was remembered. Finally, the coast of Asia Minor rose from the horizon, green and mountainous. They sailed into the great port of Ephesus, a city that pulsed with its own ancient power. As Damon disembarked, he felt the shift in atmosphere. This was a city of stone and commerce, but also of deep mystical tradition. He walked up the great Arcadian Way, a magnificent street paved with marble, and in the distance he could see the hills where the great temple of Artemis stood, a wonder of the world. It was a rebuilt temple, the previous one having been burned down on the very night Alexander the Great was born. But it was still the holiest site in the region, somewhere in this sprawling, ancient city. In the memory of its priests or the dusty records of its scribes lay the answer to the authenticity of the 6 lines. His journey was over, but his true quest had just begun. Ephesus was a city of marble and memory. Unlike the calculated Hellenistic order of Alexandria, it felt ancient, its grand avenues steeped in a deeper, more mystical Anatolian history. Damon's first task was to orient himself in this sprawling metropolis. His instincts as a scholar led him toward the great public library of the city, a magnificent structure that, while not as vast as his home institution, was a major center of learning in its own right. Here, and in the surrounding workshops of the city's book dealers and scribes, he hoped to find the first threads of his investigation. He found the city's most respected scriptorium in a narrow street behind the Grand Library. The air inside was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of aging papyrus and ink. An old man with eyes as sharp and clear as polished obsidian looked up as Damon entered. He was Theon, the master scribe, a man whose reputation for textual knowledge was known even in Alexandria. Damon presented his letter, and the old man's demeanor shifted instantly from professional indifference to deep, respectful attention. The seal of the Great Library commanded authority that transcended distance and rivalry. Damon carefully produced his wax tablet and explained his purpose. Theon took the tablet, his long, bony fingers tracing the letters. He read the 6 lines slowly, then read them again, his lips moving silently. A long silence filled the room. "The voice is his," Theon said at last, his voice a dry rustle like turning pages. "The cadence, the paradox. It feels like the work of the obscure one, but I have never seen these words. In my 50 years of copying texts, including every known fragment of Heraclitus that has passed through Ephesus. These lines are unknown to me." He leaned back, his gaze distant. "You must understand, young man," he continued, "the great fire at the temple, decades ago. It created a void. Many texts were lost entirely. Some were pieced together afterwards by men of great learning and great memory. But memory is a fickle scribe. It can be a creator as much as a preserver. An echo can be mistaken for a voice. A clever student, steeped in his master's work, might compose a line so true to the original that even he believes he is remembering, not inventing." He handed the tablet back to Damon. "You seek a clear yes or no, a scholar's certainty. I fear you will not find it here. The fire washed away all such clarity. All that is left is opinion." Damon felt a chill of disappointment. Theon's words were wise, but they led him no closer to the proof Lycomed's so desperately needed. His next stop, he knew, must be the source of the rumor itself, the great temple of Artemis. He made the journey the following day, walking out of the city center towards the sacred precinct. The temple was not a single building, but a vast complex, a city of faith. It was one of the 7 wonders of the world, a breathtaking forest of more than 100 massive marble columns, surrounded by courtyards filled with pilgrims, merchants selling offerings, and the lowing of cattle destined for sacrifice. The air was heavy with the smell of incense and roasting meat, a stark, visceral contrast to the clean, intellectual atmosphere of the Musaeum. Gaining an audience with the temple's high priest was a slow and formal process. Damon's letter was taken by a junior priest, and he was told to wait. For 2 days, he explored the outer courts of the temple, a world of fervent, emotional worship that was alien to his rational, grammatical mind. Finally, he was summoned. He was led through a series of increasingly quiet, incense-filled chambers, deep into the heart of the temple, to a simple room where the high priest, an old man named Demetrius, sat meditating. Damon, feeling like a boy, presented his case, explaining the textual problem, the crisis of scholarship his master was facing. Demetrius listened with an unnerving stillness, his eyes closed. When Damon finished, the high priest did not speak for a long time. "You come from the house of reason and logic," Demetrius said softly, his voice melodic. "You seek proof. You seek to fix a thought in place, like a butterfly pinned to a board. We here serve a different truth." He opened his eyes, and they seemed to hold an ancient, weary wisdom. After the fire, the great forgetting, it is true that we labored to restore what was lost. The sacred texts, the philosophical scrolls, they were rewritten by scribes, whose hands were guided by memory, and whose memory was guided by the goddess herself. Was it an exact copy of what came before? Who can say? Is the new sun not the sun? A memory is no less true for being remembered. The reflection of the moon in the water is still the moon for those who gaze upon it. Damon's heart sank. This was the language of mysticism, not textual criticism. But the scribe, Damon pressed, the man who copied this specific fragment, the scroll names him as Ionis. Is he here? Can I speak with him? The high priest shook his head slowly, Ionis was a strange man, a brilliant scribe, but his mind did not move in straight lines. He became obsessed with the inner meanings, the spaces between the words. He found the temple too loud, too full of voices. He left our service many years ago. They say he now lives as a hermit in the hills behind the city. He seeks a different kind of silence. Demetrios stood, signaling the end of the audience. Damon was escorted out, his mind reeling. He had come to the end of the official path. The world of scribes and priests could offer him nothing but doubt and metaphor. His only remaining hope was a reclusive old man, a mystic who had fled the world, living somewhere in the wilderness. His scholarly mission had just become a perilous journey into the unknown. For 2 days, Damon remained in Ephesus, his spirit weighed down by a sense of failure. He walked the marble streets, a ghost in a city of vibrant life, the high priest's cryptic words echoing in his mind. He was a grammarian, a man who dealt in textual evidence, in the clear, verifiable lineage of a scroll. His mission was to find proof, not metaphor, to return to Lycomedes with nothing but a rumor of a mad hermit in the hills, felt like a complete betrayal of his master's trust. He drafted a letter in his mind, a message of apology and defeat, to be sent back to Alexandria on the next ship. But as he sat one evening, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains, the 6 lines of text on his wax tablet seemed to glow in the fading light. Do not seek the fire, seek the space it has warmed. Lycomedes had sought the truth in the text itself, in the flame of the words. Theon the scribe had looked for it in the history of the scroll's transmission. The high priest had sought it in divine memory. All of them were looking at the fire. But the man who had left the temple because it was too full of voices. The man who sought a different kind of silence, ... Perhaps he had gone looking for the space the fire had warmed. The thought struck Damon with the force of a revelation. His quest was not just about the words. It was about the silence from which they had emerged. The despair in his heart was replaced by a new, steely resolve. He could not go back, not yet. He spent the next morning in the city's marketplace, a world away from the libraries and temples. He traded his fine scholar's robes for a rough, durable woolen tunic. He bought sturdy leather sandals, a large waterskin, a walking staff of polished olive wood, and a sack which he filled with hard bread, dried figs, and salty cheese. As he changed his clothes, he felt he was shedding his old self, the timid, bookish grammarian, becoming someone new, a traveler defined not by his mind, but by the purpose of his journey. Leaving the western gate of Ephesus behind, he set his face towards the rugged, sun-baked hills. The landscape changed almost immediately. The cultivated olive groves and vineyards gave way to a wilder terrain of rocky outcrops and thorny shrubs. The air grew hotter, drier, scented with wild thyme and pine. The only sound was the incessant, hypnotic chirping of cicadas. He walked for hours, following a faint shepherd's track that climbed ever higher. The physical toll was immense. He was a man accustomed to shaded colonnades and quiet reading rooms. The relentless sun beat down upon him. His muscles ached, and his new sandals rubbed his feet raw. The physical hardship was a clarifying force, stripping away all thoughts except the next step and the next. For a day he saw no one. On the second day, as he was beginning to fear he was hopelessly lost, he saw a flock of goats scattered across a hillside, and sitting under the shade of a rock, an old shepherd. The man was as weathered as the landscape, his skin like tanned leather, his eyes narrowed against the glare. He was wary of Damon, this stranger from the city, but the offer of a piece of bread and a sip of water softened him. Damon asked if he knew of a man named Ionas, a hermit, who had once been a scribe. The shepherd's eyes flickered with recognition. He spat on the ground. Ionas the silent, he grunted, or Ionas the mad, depending on the day. He speaks to no one. He lives like a wolf, alone. Why would a man like you seek a man like that? I believe he has something I need to know, Damon said simply. The shepherd shrugged, pointed with his staff towards a distant, jagged peak. He dwells on the far side of that mountain, in the valley of the dry river. There is a cave there, hidden by a gnarled olive tree. But I warn you, he does not welcome visitors. The silence is his god. He will not thank you for disturbing it. It took Damon another full day of hard walking to reach the valley. It was a place of profound and desolate beauty, a deep ravine carved into the rock, its floor a bed of sun-bleached white stones where a river had once flowed. And there, just as the shepherd had said, set into a high cliff face, was a dark opening, the mouth of a cave, partially obscured by an ancient, twisted olive tree. A thin tendril of smoke rose from a small fire pit near the entrance, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Damon approached slowly. He stood at the edge of the clearing and called out, his voice sounding small and foreign in the immense silence. Ionas, Ionas of Ephesus. There was no answer for a long moment. Then a figure emerged from the darkness of the cave. He was old, his back stooped, but he moved with a surprising agility. His hair and beard were long and white, tangled and wild. His feet were bare, and his only clothing was a simple, tattered robe. But it was his eyes that held Damon captive. They were startlingly clear and blue, and they burned with an intensity that seemed to look straight through him, as if he were a pane of glass. Damon, a man trained in the art of rhetoric and formal address, found himself completely at a loss for words. He bowed his head awkwardly. "Greetings," he stammered. "My name is Damon. I have come from the Great Library of Alexandria." The hermit Ionas did not move. He simply stared, his face a mask of stone, his intense blue eyes holding no welcome, no curiosity, nothing but a vast, unsettling emptiness. The silence stretched on, broken only by the chirping of the cicada. Finally, the old man spoke, his voice a dry, scratchy whisper, as if unused to the work of forming words. "Alexandria," he said, and the word was filled with a weary disdain. "The great cage of words. You have come a long way to bring the noise of your prison to my silence. Go back to your cage, little bird. There is nothing for you here." The hermit's words were like stones, hard and sharp, meant to wound. For a moment, Damon felt the sting of failure, a flush of shame and anger. He had endured the sea, the unfamiliar city, the wilderness, only to be dismissed as a noisy bird in a cage. The old scholar in him, the grammarian from Alexandria, wanted to argue, to present his credentials, to explain the logical importance of his mission. But the traveler who had walked the hot, dusty hills, the man who had felt the profound silence of the valley, did something else. He held Ionis's gaze. Then, slowly and deliberately, he lifted his wax tablet. With the flat end of his stylus, he scraped the surface of the wax, not with anger, but with a quiet finality. The 6 lines of text, the lines that had been the center of his world, vanished into a smooth, blank, brown smear. He had erased the words. "You are right," Damon said, his voice now calm and steady. "They are just words. But in Alexandria, a good man, my master, has built his entire life around the ghost of a thought left by Heraclitus. His peace, the work of his whole life, now rests on knowing whether this is a true ghost or a false one. I did not come here to bring you noise. I came for the truth of a memory, a flicker of something surprise, perhaps respect, passed through Ionis's piercing blue eyes. The hard mask of his face softened almost imperceptibly. He looked at the blank tablet in Damon's hand, then at Damon's earnest, sunburnt face. After a long silence, he gave a slight nod toward the small fire pit. "The sun will set soon," the hermit rasped. "The night brings predators. Sit, share my fire." As darkness fell, blanketing the valley in a cool, deep silence, broken only by the crackle of the flames, Ionis finally began to speak. He spoke of his life as a young scribe at the temple in the years after the Great Fire. He described the desperate, chaotic effort to reconstruct the library from memory and from the few scorched fragments that remained. "We were so proud," Ionis said, his gaze lost in the fire. "We believed the goddess was guiding our hands, helping us remember her sacred texts. I was assigned the philosophers. I lived in the mind of Heraclitus for years. I read every fragment 100 times. I slept with his words in my ears. He spoke of the world as an ever-living fire, and I felt that fire in my own heart." He paused, poking the embers with a stick. "One night I had a dream. I was standing by a river, but it was a river of fire, and a voice, which I believed was his, spoke to me. It spoke the words you carry. The truth is not the flame, but the memory of its heat. When I awoke, the lines were burned into my mind. I did not believe I had created them. I believed I had received them. I believed I had found a lost piece of his soul. So, in my zeal, I added the fragment to a new copy I was making, noting that it was from a remembered text of the temple." He looked at Damon, a deep sadness in his eyes. "But then I watched what happened. I watched the other priests and scholars seize upon the words. They began to build new arguments, new cages of logic around them. They worshipped the new flame, the new text. They did not understand the message. The truth was not in the words themselves, but in the silence they came from. I saw that I had not brought them a truth. I had only given them a new set of bars for their cages, so I left. I came here to live in the silence, to be closer to the source, not its written echo. Damon finally had his answer. The words were not authentic in the way Lycomedes needed them to be. They were not a direct copy of a lost original. They were the product of a dream, of a mystic's profound and heartfelt connection to a long-dead philosopher. "What should I tell my master?" Damon asked quietly. "Go back," said Ionis. "Tell him the truth. Tell him the lines were born from a dream in a scribe's heart, not from an ancient scroll. And then ask him this: does the river care what name you give it? Its nature is to flow. Heraclitus saw the flow. A man who has spent a lifetime truly understanding that should not be afraid of a new drop of water." Damon shared the hermit's simple meal of roasted herbs and hard bread. He slept under the brilliant stars, the most profound sleep of his life. The next morning, he thanked the old man, who simply nodded and retreated back into the shadows of his cave. As Damon began his long journey back down the mountain, the world felt different. The sun felt new, yet it was the oldest fire. He carried no text, no proof, only a story. He had the answer that could shatter his master's work, but he also carried a sliver of wisdom that might just save it. His quest, which had begun as a search for a fact, had ended with the discovery of a far more complicated and beautiful truth. Finished.